Okay, welcome tonight. I would love to welcome everyone to the special debate being hosted by the Libertarian Medical Freedom Caucus. My name is Brittany Kosin, and I'm an emergency room registered nurse and emergency medical technician. It is my pleasure to guide tonight's discussion amongst our distinguished candidates, Dr. Mike ter Maat and Dr. Michael Rectenwald, both of whom are frontrunners for the Libertarian Party nomination for President of the United States. And tonight we will delve into several critical topics that are at the forefront of libertarian discourse. A little bit about the topic tonight. We will discuss primarily medical freedom and related topics, including healthcare reform. In addition, we will touch on a few other topics and basic questions for our candidates. Now to explain our debate format tonight. Unless stated otherwise, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, followed by a 1-minute rebuttal from the other candidate. Our goal is to foster a constructive and respectful dialogue that highlights libertarian solutions to these issues we bring up. Does everyone understand?
Yes.
Okay. Let's get started. So the first question, is there a constitutional basis for medical freedom? And we will start with Dr. Rectenwald. 2 minutes.
Yes, I think there is a constitutional basis for medical freedom. That is, I believe that the First Amendment really would cover that and the Fourth Amendment would cover that. The two combined, I think, suggest that the government has no business injecting you or instituting or introducing into your body anything that you do not want to have introduced. This is absolutely not the role of the government. And that's really, quite frankly, in a nutshell, the gist and the main idea about medical freedom is that we need to have free choice without state intervention. I think that's very clear. I think that what we underwent during the COVID crisis was a kind of what I've called COVID totalitarianism, in which we had the state colluding with corporate partners in big tech and big pharma, not only to, coax us into a vaccine, but also to squelch information. They used big tech in collusion with the state, various agencies to squelch COVID information that did not fit the main narrative. And this was a major source of, I think they actually spread disinformation as well of their own, changing their story as time went on. So this was a major propaganda war against us. And I have a very good friend who studies propaganda for a living. His name's Mark Crispin Miller. And he said, I asked him, how do you know when you're dealing with propaganda? He said, when everybody's saying the same thing. That's one of the sure signs. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rectenwald. Dr. ter Maat, your turn.
Thanks very much. That was an excellent answer, by the way. I don't think you have to call us doctors, Brittany. I'm afraid that people in the audience are going to think that we're an ophthalmologist and a pediatrician here talking about medical freedom. Michael's exactly right, and good for him for identifying the first and fourth. I would go one layer maybe higher in the sense that on an even more fundamental level, if the Constitution were completely silent, we would recognize that the federal government of the United States had no business telling us what we can or cannot do with our body. In that sense, it's the kind of thing that applies to the war on drugs, which I also believe is completely unconstitutional, and any of the other ways in which the federal government intrudes on our health, on our lives, right? I think that the reason that there is not a specific amendment in the Bill of Rights that addresses medical freedom is that the framers of our Constitution couldn't possibly have imagined that our government would one day try to coerce us into using a particular medicine, a particular protocol, that our government would try to suppress a discussion of certain protocols and certain medicines, that it would try to get us all herded into one type of behavior, that the government would offer payments to not only corporations, but individuals who are pulling money both from the private sector and from the federal government at the same time while overseeing the development of vaccines. I don't think the framers could even imagine such stupidity. And so we need to let them off the hook and not be too angry with them that there wasn't an amendment that addresses this in particular. But I would be open to that idea going forward. I think a 28th Amendment to address medical freedom may be in order in the future.
Okay. Rec, 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, I think what Mike has said is indubitably true. There's no question about this. It violates the most fundamental notions of bodily autonomy. I think more fundamentally, the principles of libertarianism get at this issue, and that is we have ownership over ourselves. That is first and foremost the key. So likewise, having ownership means that you are free to dispose with it as you wish. And I mean, of course, you are free to do with it what you will. And that means that you are not to be violated in any sense. Now, during the COVID crisis, we had a lot of propaganda. I was out in front of this very much so by writing essays and speaking on numerous occasions. I actually wrote a novel about a virus during this period. I have a major section in my book, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, that talks about all of the various simulations that ran before the COVID crisis hit, leading people to believe that there was something going on besides an accidental release or what have you. But I never came down on that. I'm just suggesting that this was so obviously a propaganda war against the American people that it has. And I was out in front of this from the get-go. I saw this coming. And we have to have a leader that can see these things coming so that they know when the next crisis comes, they aren't falling for it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. And then Mike, your 1 minute rebuttal.
Sure. By the way, Rec got 2 minutes and he made good use of it. I think that everything he said was on the button. By the way, when I interviewed Michael, he told me about this fiction book that he had written, and I commend it to everyone. I only just started it, but it looks like a lot of fun. I think that that's exactly right. What we need to learn from the COVID mania regime is that the government can make us do some weird shit. And we need to be ready for the next time, which may not be a virus. It may be some other, weird natural phenomenon. I was out in front of this as well. As you all may know, I had written a white paper about not shutting down our economy in April of 2020. I and a lot of other officers on our department were able to effectively nullify what it is that the county wanted us to do in terms of shutting down social events, shutting down businesses. We were able to tell our bosses to go pound sand. And I was really proud of my fellow officers, most of whom were registered Republicans. And to be able to do that was a real opportunity. I wish that we had done a better job as a party in 2020. I think that we had a big political opportunity that we somewhat missed. When I ran for Congress in 2021, it was on a platform that was completely against the idea of school closures and mask mandates and vaccine mandates. And people were very open to those ideas.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, both of you. On to our next question. The concept of informed consent is important in medicine. Please explain your understanding of informed consent and what libertarian principles are inherent in this concept and its importance. We will switch it up and we will start with Mike ter Maat. 2 minutes.
Sure, thanks. Informed consent is the very basis of the relationship between us and our physicians. The idea is that doctors are pledged to not giving us medicines without we knowing everything that we need to know about them. And the reason that this is so important is that the government has injected itself in the way of this relationship between us and our doctors by not providing all of the information, covering up information, the vaccine development for the COVID virus being the biggest, most recent example, but there were plenty of other examples as well. And this whole idea of coercing employees into taking a vaccine or else you're going to lose your job is completely antithetical to the idea that you should be able to engage in informed consent, because informed consent means you have to have all of the information, which people didn't have. The government went so far as to suppress discussion of certain ideas online, which is really horrible. And then, of course, the idea of taking a vaccine at that point was not even consensual. If you are being coerced under threat of losing your job, that's not consensual. And that's not the way that medicine should work anywhere, least of all in the United States. And so it's really, really fundamental. Informed consent is one of those things that's born out of really libertarian ideals and should exclude the government completely.
Okay. On to Mr. Rectenwald, your 2 minutes.
Yes, I mean, informed consent is at the bottom of libertarian philosophy and libertarian ideals, and that is to say, a lack of informed consent is really amounts to fraud, and that's exactly what we saw being undertaken by big pharma in collusion with the government during the COVID crisis and beyond. These companies ran they had tests that were misrepresented in their literature. They didn't run any nearly the human trials they should have run. This was sold to us on the major media as safe and effective. I didn't buy it for 1 second that it was safe and effective, but others did. And I'm not blaming them, but I think to be a leader in this movement, you need to be, and this party, you need to be out in front of these kinds of things. You need to be on the avant-garde, able to see through these things in advance. But look, what Big Pharma was given was indemnity from liability, which was outrageous. And they get this patent protection, this limited monopoly. All of this should be stricken. All of this should be completely stricken. Plus, the government shouldn't be buying drugs from a pharmaceutical company and then distributing it to the public. This should be done in the free market, not with government interference at all. No intervention, no sales, no buying, no selling, nothing. They should not be involved. They should not be giving patents to these pharmaceutical companies. These patents are a limited monopoly, and then they also use their power to block all other alternative medications out of the market. And they effectively they bought the fact checkers on Facebook and Twitter. Pharmaceutical companies bought the fact checkers. They were paid for by these pharmaceutical companies. So the whole thing was a scam, and informed consent was completely left out of the equation. There was no sense of anything being informed adequately. It was fraudulent, and that is a swindle, and that violates the non-aggression principle.
Okay. Now, Mr. ter Maat, your 1 minute rebuttal.
Sure. Look, when the government took control of the narrative, they did so in profoundly illegal ways by suppressing discussion. Now we know that not only did the government violate our First Amendment rights by suppressing discussion online, but did so in a way that hurt us. We now know that ivermectin was a medicine that probably would have helped a lot of people, that hydroxychloroquine probably would have helped a lot of people, that a different protocol for treating COVID, as Peter McCullough has pointed out to us, probably would have helped a lot of people. Greater dissemination of the information regarding side effects of the vaccine. Holy cow, we now know that the number of people killed, not hurt, by these side effects are in the hundreds of thousands. This is information that should have been disseminated, and it's really evil that the government was behind the idea of suppressing this.
Okay. And Mr. Rectenwald, your 1 minute rebuttal.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything Mike has said here. This was a major scandal. I think this is criminal, and I think there needs to be a criminal investigation into what happened over the COVID crisis, beginning not with the vaccines, but with the creation of the viruses themselves. Why is the United States government funding and paying for bioweapons to be produced? And the question is whether the virus was made for the vaccine or the vaccine for the virus. It's hard to say. In other words, look, there's a production here, coordinated production of bioweapons by the U.S. government, paying EcoHealth Alliance that then sends money through to the Wuhan lab. I mean, this was all outrageous. And now, finally, the Biden administration has said they're cutting off any funds to EcoHealth Alliance. So from the very inception of the virus all the way through the vaccine, all of it needs to be investigated and criminal proceedings to follow.
Okay.
I agree. Are we still on this topic?
We will
give me
be.
1 minute and let Rec have another minute if he wants one. I really think that he brought up an important topic here. The idea that the vaccine and the virus itself were apparently developed both through federal funding, right? The vaccine was actually developed in its overall outline before this particular virus. So it was obviously part of the same program, right? And to your point, Michael, what are we doing creating a bioweapon, wait for it, in China? And then, you know, we allow it to leak, and God, let's hope we find out that it was a mistake rather than on purpose. And this is obviously still an open question. The government should not be involved in any of this in any way whatsoever. And to your point about criminality, I agree. We need a criminal investigation. My biggest fear is that we'll appoint a special investigator, and hopefully that gets turned into a special prosecutor, right? But one of my greatest fears is that all of this shit that was done, we're going to find out was basically not in violation of criminal statutes, that the law has been crafted in such a way that these idiots get away with this bullshit without violating federal law. And that is a real problem. Thanks for letting me prattle on, Brittany. You owe Michael a minute or two.
Something seems to be okay. There we are.
If you want to rebut, Mr. Rectenwald, I'll go ahead.
Just call me Michael, by the way. Thank you. No, there's nothing really to rebut. Why is the state funding bioweapons? Why is it funding anything medical or deleterious? Why is it doing any of this? We need an absolute separation of state and medicine, an absolute separation of state and science, an absolute separation of state and health all together. There should never be lockdowns in the cases of disease. This should never happen. It should never be recommended from the top. It should never be rolled out. And the state has no business rolling out a vaccine like they did in Operation Warp Speed under Trump. The state has no business in any of this. So this is the biggest problem. And you know, one of the commenters said that they were in Australia. I wrote about what happened in Australia while it was happening. It was unbelievable what they did to these people. And I was very nervous that the more draconian measures from Australia were going to come here.
Sorry, I was having a little technical difficulties on my end.
Okay. Don't touch anything.
I cannot hear
That's
either.
my recommendation. Don't touch a thing once it's working.
I know. I didn't touch anything. All of a sudden, you guys just faded into the sunset sound wise, and I couldn't figure it out. I got it. If we want to continue on this topic, I have another question. We can listen, and then you guys can decide. The mishandling of the COVID pandemic was for many medical freedom advocates a clear demonstration of violations of the libertarian principles, and in addition, more specifically, medical freedom concepts. What should have been done differently? Pretty sure we covered
We've covered that
pretty in depth.
So.
Let's just say everything, and more.
Everything. Yeah.
Everything.
Let's
and more.
find something that they should have done. But Michael, you and I agree that there is no appropriate role for government in these areas. And so even if the government did something not stupidly, it still should not have been in there doing anything. I like Dave's comment there. This episode is definitely not WHO approved.
Okay. We seem to have a glitch again.
Brittany, we can't hear you.
Do you need me to come in there?
Yeah, I know. It keeps trying to connect to a Bluetooth headphones. That's my problem.
Yeah, a couple of people have weighed in saying that they don't want us to sign the WHO treaty.
Pandemic treaty. Absolutely not. That has to be prevented. Absolutely 100%. And I would absolutely tear it to shreds. In fact, I would withdraw from the WHO, the UN, all of these organizations. I would stop funding to the World Economic Forum. Actually, we are funding them.
Yeah.
All these globalist organizations have to be defunded, and we have to get rid of their influence over our state altogether.
I agree. That's well said. And you know, Michael, one of the things that drives me crazy about these organizations is we fund them and then they get their own staff, right? And then they take on a life of their own. You know, they have their own objectives and their own agenda, and then certain governments will agree with them, and they gang up on the other governments. It's really a disgusting proposition. I'm surprised. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. I guess I'm frequently surprised. The Biden administration doesn't seem the least bit nervous about not including the Senate in confirming what would have, in effect, be a treaty that the WHO is putting out there.
Indeed. That treaty would effectively abrogate our national and individual sovereignty. That treaty would make the WHO's recommendations more like rules, universal across all of its member states. That means the United States would be following WHO recommendations. And what do we see from the WHO in the past? Outrageous recommendations, vaccination recommendations, rollouts of closure recommendations, lockdowns,
Yep.
all of this stuff they recommended. And so they're a total disaster. And the guy that runs it, Tedros, is a communist. So that's not good either. Because
no, you're on point, and he is hardcore. It reminds me of NATO in the sense that there is an obligatory element to this, right? It's a treaty that is supposed to oblige the members to take certain action. And in the WHO case, that could mean the suppression of information. It can mean protocols for rolling out vaccines. It can mean protocols for treating diseases. It's really bad stuff. And it reminds me of NATO, because once you sign up for one of these treaties, your government is going to feel obliged to take action, even if it wouldn't be necessarily in your interest to take action at that point otherwise. That's why these treaties are so important. And the Biden administration seems to think this is just another tool in their arsenal to get us to do stuff that we don't want to do.
Okay. So I have one last
We're going to let
question.
Brittany speak?
My turn. I have one last question for both of you, and then we will switch into the more individualized questions. As president, would you push to deregulate the health insurance industry? And if so, how would you ensure that the vulnerable populations are not left without affordable options? We will start with Mr. Rectenwald.
You can call me Rec or Michael, by the way.
Well, it's hard because I have Mike and Michael. So,
Well, that works.
Listen, yeah, you want to repeat that because I've distracted myself now.
okay. As president, would you push to deregulate the health insurance industry? And if so, how would you ensure that vulnerable populations are not left without affordable options?
I would not only get rid of regulations, I would absolutely get rid of all the regulators. I would get rid of the entire regulatory regime across the board and let the market operate properly on all these matters, on the matters of health insurance, on the matters of health care and medication, everything. So the whole regulatory regime has to go 100%. I was looking at your website, the Medical Freedom Caucus website earlier, and I had only one difference with it. And that was when it said reforming these regulators or reforming regulations. I think regulators, the whole regulatory regime must go.
Okay.
I think that's right. And, sometimes we lose track of how fundamental the role of insurance has become. And of course, that started with the advantages to insurance in the corporate tax code, which is something that we need to change as well. Now, insurance has taken over the market and the federal government has taken over insurance. And so through Medicare and Medicaid, the federal government has taken over so much, and it uses Medicare and Medicaid as an excuse to regulate all kinds of things, including bribing people like you, Brittany, I suspect, to take a vaccine or to do all kinds of other weird stuff that they want you to do. And so this idea of this, an agency like Medicare and its funding mechanism being in the role of approving medicines and pushing medicines, right? And then bribing people into taking medicines. It's just an inappropriate set of relationships. I agree with Michael wholeheartedly. These agencies have got to absolutely go. One of the reasons why insurance is so expensive, of course, is the regulatory framework. But another one is this idea of Obamacare defining what insurance programs you are required to have. So if you wanted just a catastrophic program, you can't get it and check the annual box on your income tax statement that says you have insurance that complies with the federal government. That is some serious crap that undermines our ability to get cheap policies that should be available, especially to those Americans who are relatively healthy or relatively young, who just want an affordable program. And if we had more catastrophic only insurance programs, we would have more direct payments, and that would cause the markets to bring prices down.
I'm going to jump in between here and put my little 2 cents in because I'm dealing with this firsthand because I work per diem at my hospital, so I don't qualify for the health insurance through the employer. And I make too much money, so I don't qualify for Medicaid. So just for me and 2 of the 3 children, because Antonio, our oldest, qualifies for Medicaid because of his autism. So that's at least a little silver lining. But for me and 2 of the kids, the cheapest plan is over $600 a month just for us. And we are healthy. I take 2 medications. The kids, my daughter takes an allergy med, and the littlest doesn't take anything. We go to the doctors twice a year, and that's about it. I definitely think we need the catastrophic and like they have for Medicaid or Medicare, like the Part D prescription plan. Like, should be able to get it to go to your doctor 2 or 3 times a year and get a prescription plan like deal.
Yeah.
Let me just say, and I'll yield the same amount of time to Mike over this, is to answer the second part of the question, which you've basically alluded to here, is how do we make sure people are insured that need it? And I think once you get rid of these agencies and then actually other intermediaries, even insurance possibly, and have crowd-funded medical care, to a great extent, to have a singular doctor with whom you have a contract and pay a monthly fee, cutting out the middleman of insurance altogether. This could go a long way towards getting healthcare into an affordable good. Right now, it is not affordable thanks to the interventionism of the state. So if anything libertarians can teach this world is that the state distorts all markets all the time. It is a vast distorter of the market. The markets would settle into much better. We would get way more goods for less money. Okay, we'd have a veritable cornucopia if the state would stay the hell out of all business, period. You wouldn't believe the difference we would have. So people wouldn't be struggling like they are. And the state is a well, I've put it very clearly. The state is a parasite. It's just living off of the backs of the productive members of society.
That's really well put. And it's no coincidence that the markets in the United States about which we are most frustrated are those that the government plays the largest role. If you look at, how frustrated are we with public school education, right? That is not an industry that you would look at and say, yeah, it works pretty well. We are enormously frustrated with law enforcement, how we hold cops accountable, right? That is not an industry you would point to and say, oh boy, I wish computer manufacturing were set up like the business of policing. No, it's insane. And you look at medical care, it is the most messed up industry in the United States. And it is one of the most messed up medical industries worldwide. And it's because the federal government participates in it so heavily and uses state governments to do its bidding through this contraption of layers of bribes and payments to get people to behave in weird ways that they wouldn't otherwise, conduct themselves. So I agree with you. We need to get the government completely out of it and let markets work. And until and unless we do that, prices will not come down. Costs will continue to escalate.
Okay. So that concludes right now our questions for both of you guys. We will move on to the candidate directed questions. With these, there is no rebuttal right now.
Not now, but maybe later. No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe we can come back to it at the end.
We don't need to.
You can't stop us from calling on the phone, Michael. We can always call each other.
He's gonna. We're gonna rebut each other's past history. Yeah.
But we can't. It's done.
Right.
Okay. So, with these first two questions, you each get about 3 to 4 minutes to answer. We will start with Mike ter Maat. What did you do see if I can read. So I don't have my glasses on today. What did you do as a police officer during the pandemic? Some people have questions about what cops did and did not do.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. It varies widely from one agency to another. Most of the stuff that, we don't like law enforcement officers doing during the COVID regime was done by sheriff's offices, right? Because they were the ones that enforced the weird codes that the counties would impose, like business shutdowns and social setting shutdowns and, mask requirements and weird stuff like that was by and large handled by sheriff's offices. In our police department, there were a couple of examples in which the administration asked the police department to help out with a couple things. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, so I apologize for being a little bit redundant. But a lot of us, not just myself, by the way, I in particular gave our administration a hard time and told them that we weren't going to be doing certain things. But I really want to hasten to add that a lot of my coworkers, registered Republicans, also gave the administration a hard time. So, for example, we weren't shutting down swimming pool parties, and we weren't shutting down, a couple of bars that chose to remain open in a variety of ways in our town. And we just let that to the administration. If the politicians wanted to go out there, or someone wanted to, require them to have some weird court hearing or something, they could do what they're going to do, but count us as police officers out of it. I also ran for Congress, while I was a police officer. My platform was all about anti-mandates for vaccines and for masking and against the school closures and the business closures. So that was a huge opportunity for us to get our message out. I was very much involved with the Libertarian Party of Broward County at the time. And we spent a lot of time in 2020, 2021, 2022, rallying people against these ideas. I led a rally at the Broward public school system and, spoke to their board. And I rallied at the Palm Beach school board. It was a huge opportunity to get our message out. And I'm really disappointed that in certain circumstances, we missed some of these opportunities. I thought that our national campaign in 2020 should have done a better job of taking advantage of that. So, in answer to your question regarding police, generally, it's hit or miss. Some police departments weren't asked to do much. And then there were police departments that gave pushback. And then, there were sheriff's offices that just rolled over and did whatever it is that their governor asked them to do. And I think that that's a real shame. But I am proud of the officers that gave pushback the way that I did and my coworkers did, because it can really make a difference.
Okay. So on to Michael Rectenwald. You were a supporter of Trump, including Operation Warp Speed, and supported Republicans. Can you just explain why?
Well, I would explain why, but the question has a faulty premise. It's not true. I didn't support Trump. I didn't support Operation Warp Speed. I don't know where this would come from. There's nothing in the record. In fact, during the whole COVID crisis, I went around. First of all, I wrote a novel that tried to illustrate what was going on. It's called Thought Criminal. Secondly, I wrote about 5 essays for the Mises Institute about COVID totalitarianism. Third, I spoke at 3 or 4 Mises Caucus events during this, calling out COVID totalitarianism for what it was. I absolutely never supported Operation Warp Speed. That is completely fallacious. And the Twitter account that I operate now was not under my control at that time, but even that person, no way supported Operation Warp Speed. Not in any way, shape, or form. I never supported Trump. I cast one FU ballot to the establishment in 2016 for Trump. Not for Trump. It was really for the people that the establishment had deemed the deplorables, the basket of deplorables. I found that rhetoric to be so abominable that I wanted to stand in solidarity with them, because these coastal elites were trying to make them feel like they were nothing. And that's continuing to this day. So I would say we need to revise the history that is not true, and to really look at what I did during that time. You can go on my website, Rectenwald.com, see all the essays that I wrote during the COVID crisis. Some very thoughtful pieces. One is called Living in the Age, The Power of the Powerless, Living in the Age of COVID, in which I drew from Václav Havel's essay on the power of the powerless and applied it to the COVID situation, which we all seem to be powerless with this state and its appendages coming down on us so hard. So no, never supported Operation Warp Speed, never really supported Trump, supported kind of gesture, which was a lot of people do political gestures that don't identify them for life as anything. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. We have one more question for each of you specifically, and then we'll go back to the both questions. This is for Mike ter Maat. The right to try laws allow terminally ill patients to access experimental treatments not yet fully approved by the FDA. Do you support expanding these laws? How would you ensure safety and informed consent in the process of deregulating drug approval for such cases?
Yeah, I think that you should have the right to try anything you want. I don't think that you need to be, in my view, you shouldn't have to be terminal before you're allowed to try a medication. It seems to me, first of all, I got a problem with the FDA, the fact that the FDA exists. If the FDA is going to exist, I believe it should exist in the private sector. If somebody wanted to privatize the FDA, I would be okay with that. If somebody just wanted to take it behind the barn and shoot it like a dog, that'd be okay with me too. The idea that the government would tell you that you're not allowed to use a medication. Look, we don't, as libertarians, we've got an ethical problem with the war on drugs, right? With the government telling you that you can or cannot use drugs that probably a lot of people consider bad for you. But the idea that the government should tell you you can't use a drug that's good for you, I find that not only unethical, but what's the right word? Stupid. You should be allowed to try something just because, you know, the government says it's a bad idea, or just because a whole group of doctors say it's a bad idea. You should be able to use off-label. You should be able to use trial. You should be able to use something that you bring in from another country that's never been tried in the United States. You should be able to try anything you want. This idea that the government should tell you you can't, I think is really horrible. And so I appreciate the context, right? That, you know, at the very least, a loophole, if you're terminally ill, you know, you need to be able to be more creative. You know, all of that is true. But I think that goes in the bucket of, you know, how the advice from a doctor should change for someone who is terminally ill. But as far as the government goes, it should not be in the business of telling you what you can or cannot do, whether you're terminally ill or not, in my view.
Okay.
If Michael feels differently, he can weigh in on that.
I you know, look, I've said that we should, and I'm glad I'm moving the conversation toward liberty all the time. I've said long ago that all of these agencies should be absolutely abolished. So they wouldn't, and there should be no laws about whether you could take a medication or not at all. Of course. Yeah. That's beyond the pale. And informed consent in this case, it just means you get all the information that you possibly can. And we cannot, as human beings, eliminate risk from life. This is one of the things that we need to accept. Risk is inherent to our existence, and it can't be eliminated entirely. So that has to be understood. And with liberty, of course, comes responsibility. You take action, you're responsible for that action. So that's all I have to say about it.
Okay. I have a question for you, Rec. As you know, medications like methylprednisolone used for abortions up to 10 weeks. It also treats ulcers and manage miscarriages. Activists are currently trying to stop the FDA approval of this medication, which would remove access for millions of women. Do you agree with the attempts to limit federal/state access to abortion drugs?
This is a very thorny question. And let me just start by retracing something that's going on today. And that is the federal government is funding abortions. That I would cut immediately. That funding is an outrage. As to whether people want to take a drug that would start an abortion or inaugurate an abortion, I would say No, the federal government has no business in regulating any medication whatsoever, whether for abortion or not. Now, that all being said, I do believe that abortion is an NAP violation, that the individual human being has a right to exist, whatever their size, whatever their stage of development or whatever. In other words, they have personal property in themselves, just like every other person. But all that being said, I don't want the federal government arresting women or doctors for abortions, and I don't want the government regulating drugs. I think that's totally outrageous. And and look, we don't have a consensus about abortion, and until that's the case, and I think it really should be decided locally. Frankly, I guess there's nothing else to be said about it except that what I think about it, what I believe about it, but what I would not have the state do about it at all.
I think that that's really well said. The federal government does not have a role in this. It needs to be handled at the state. And you put your finger right on a really important word, local. It has to be decided as locally as possible. The other word that you put your finger on, Michael, that I really took to heart is consensus. When our government decides that it's not going to let us do something that our culture has not developed a consensus around, that's where black markets come from. And we know that black markets are deadly. Black markets kill people. And for that reason, those of us, you and I are pretty similar in this sense. Those of us who are fundamentally, personally pro-life, we need to make our case in society and culture at large. And until there is a consensus, we need to keep the government out of the business of using public policy and force and the criminal code to try to affect, how our society and our culture feel about these things. To criminalize things without a consensus is backwards, in my view.
Okay. Now I'm going to jump in here again. And I have spoken to both of you individually in person about what I'm about to say is when I was running for state rep, my big thing I kept getting was, are you pro-life or pro-choice? And I always came back with this answer, and I probably would say is one of the most libertarian answers I could come up with. I'm neither pro-life nor pro-choice. I am pro your choice. And that goes along with that it's the woman and the doctor. It's not the state. It's not the county. It's not the federal government. It's the woman and her doctor make a decision on what is best for her, her family, and her health and well-being. And that I feel is the best or one of the better approaches towards this controversial abortion topic. What I just want to have for the viewers and stuff, what your guys' take on that perspective would be.
Brittany, could you say that?
With,
give us a consolidated version of that. Your mic cut out there just for a moment.
Just what is your guys' perspective on the pro your choice perspective? We'll go with Rec, because you just talked last, Mike.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, as I said, I believe that abortion is a violation of the NAP and also the violation of individual rights. And it is an aggression against the person's being. And that is a violation of the NAP. That being said, I don't want the state arresting doctors or women. And I don't think the state has any role here. So it does come down to your choice. I would like to influence that choice over time, but I have no intention of using the state. In fact, I want to dismantle the whole thing, but I have no intention of using the state against you, period.
That's well said. And I think it needs to be said that when we do use the state, when we do use the criminal code as a matter of force against people who want to make their own decisions, that too is a violation of the NAP. And so really this comes down to a balancing act of, how you weigh the rights of different individuals. And my own view is that before, certainly before fetal viability, that is something that has to be absolutely left to a doctor and the mother. Absolutely. So I guess in sum, Brittany, I liked your answer.
It does come down to your
Okay.
choice.
Yeah, I'm pulling one question that's real quick from comments earlier. It goes about what are your quick 2-minute statement on physician assisted suicide and what your opinion is on that. Mike.
Well, I hate it, but not enough to use the government to stop it, right? It's not the government's role to stop it. I hate suicide for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is my own personal ethics and the faith in which I was raised and have come to embrace. So I'm as anti-suicide as they come, and that is a longer conversation and not appropriate for tonight. But having said that, I don't believe that we can invite the state into telling you what you can or cannot do. This is a very tricky area legally because it's obviously a fine line between assisting a suicide, right, and in effect committing a homicide, which is really what we're talking about. So it is a very, very tricky area, and good for you for bringing it up. But we need to recognize that people, are going to make choices that maybe I wouldn't make, maybe you wouldn't make. But what's the alternative? That we're going to prosecute them in some sense? We're going to lock up doctors who help people execute on their own choices. That would be wrong also. And so it's really, again, a balancing act, but a balancing act that has to be weighed by the people involved, not by the state. By the way, just real quick, some dude asks, sheriffs are usually more market oriented. That's true. And asks, many were praised. That's absolutely true. Why were they worse? No, I didn't mean that they were worse. What I meant was the sheriff's offices were so often used in a worse way because they're the ones that are legally an operative of the state, whereas local police departments are operatives of the cities. And it was usually county ordinances that we were discussing with the COVID regime. I didn't mean to say something disparaging about sheriff's offices.
Okay. Rec, you're on the physician assisted suicide.
Well, I echo much of what Mike said. I deplore it personally, ethically, and otherwise. And I think that, in fact, there's more to this than meets the eye. We have a great move in Canada to accelerate this particular agenda item. I think it is. There is a concerted effort on the part of certain peoples who happen to have a great deal of influence to try to reduce the population for some reason. Okay, so if people would read about these things, they might not be so happy to let the agenda go through them, make them a victim of it. But on that being said, and no matter what you think about that doesn't matter, because I don't want the state interfering between a doctor and a patient, and I don't want them stopping anyone from undertaking such acts. It's inconsistent with libertarian philosophy to do that. As I've said before, I want the state abolished, period. I'm for privatization and personal relationships and commerce to be totally free, including something like this, which I think is ethically wrong, and I would say so. I'm not going to hide my views. And I think also part of a broader agenda to try to eradicate some people from the face of the earth. I would hope that no one here is faced with with this sense that they need to end their life at some point. I think one of the reasons we have people feeling this way is because of the dystopia that this regime has made for us. We're living in a hellhole in many senses. I mean, many things are so-called normal, but there's a lot of crap that's being done to us, and the regime is responsible, and that's why people are feeling hopeless. Also, if the state hadn't been, sucking our lifeblood for all these people's live long years, they might be able to have a better life in the first place, such that they don't want to feel like they got to off themselves. And sometimes these are for economic reasons. People feel like they're a burden to their family. That's a real damn shame. And there's no reason why any family could not support a person through to the end of life naturally. But like I said, the state's got no business. The state created these problems largely. It's created the nihilism that's pervading our culture today in collusion with its partners. It's created this sort of dystopia they want to foist on us. And don't let them kill you. That's all I got to say.
And Michael, to your point about the state shouldn't be allowed to exist, could there be a more stark example of the state having a different interest than we do as citizens? As in, it wants us dead in Canada. Can there? It's just, I don't even know what to say after that. That's not a punchline. I'm really glad you brought up the Canada example. That is absolutely disgusting. And this idea that, well, the state has an interest in you being dead because it's paying so much money for nationalized insurance. The whole thing is disgusting on multiple layers. I'm really glad you brought up that example.
Thank you.
Okay. Back onto our topic questions here. The World Health Organization International Health Regulations Amendment. Trying to read this. This makes no sense now. Okay. That amendments that are being proposed have many people in the liberty movement concerned. What do you think about them and why? And what do you propose we in the liberty movement do to prevent nations, including the U.S., from participating?
I think we sort of covered this.
I think we covered that one. That's what I said.
I would add one thing to that, what I answered, and I'll yield time also to Mike, of course, because Mike and I are fair guys. And let me just say this, that I think the solution is decentralization and nullification and resistance to all of these impositions at the local level. That's the only place you can stop it. They have to drive everything down into the deep fabric of the social order in order to execute their plans. So I think the only way to stop it is at the local level. And the most local level, of course, is your own self. So you have to resist these impositions altogether. It's going to take, and it took during COVID, it'll even take more during other crises that they'll bring back or bring up. It takes personal courage and it takes strength to resist these impositions. That's the most local level. So first thing you got to do is get yourself decoupled from the centralized federal and global hegemon and act as an independent individual. This is what we have to do. We have to embody liberty, not only talk about it, we have to be it in the present. And so that's my answer to that.
No, that's good stuff. Exert your personal agency and accept personal responsibility and support each other, because so often we find that liberty is a team sport. I think all of that is true. And what we said earlier remains true as well, that these organizations should not be among those that we fund. We should not be funding organizations outside of our government that our government then becomes members and uses these organizations as an excuse to impose on us a whole nother regime. In this case, trying to sidestep the Senate, but also trying to sidestep the Constitution. I think that this is just an excuse that the Biden administration is using to be able to get its way. And, I thought of another example, which is really weird, but the OECD is the Organization of Economic Developed Countries in English, but it's OECD. The Biden administration is using this organization to ram through the idea that everyone should have a minimum level of corporate tax so that companies won't flee the United States and go somewhere else. It's trying to get everyone in the world to go along with this idea of high taxation. It's just a way to get around Congress, get around the Constitution by using these organizations outside of our border. It's a really weird political tactic that we got to stop.
Okay. So it looks, I'm going to start moving away from a little bit more of our medical stuff because we've really covered pretty much a lot of the major topics. This is for Mike. Tell us about your 20-year ideological journey to being a Libertarian presidential candidate. So pretty much how you got to where you are.
20 years. Maybe I should start even further. I don't know. In the 80s, I got out of engineering school and MBA school. I went to work for banks. I was a fiscally conservative corporate finance professional. I was a registered Republican. I later went to the George Washington University, a very pro-market oriented economics program that put me in good stead for the rest of my life. I had a really good experience there. I went to work for the White House for a couple of years in the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. And that was a real turning point for me. You may recall, youngsters, Brittany, you'll have to ask your parents about this. Michael might remember. George Herbert Walker Bush was the guy who famously said, when they come for new taxes, I'll say, read my lips, no new taxes. And then he went along and agreed to new taxes eventually anyway. That, for a young fiscally conservative economist, that's kind of a big deal, right? It causes you to lose faith in the Republican Party, and for good reason. It wasn't until later that I registered as a Libertarian when the Republican Party did a lot of weird things regarding trying to use public policy to affect culture. I would point DOMA as an example, right? The Defense of Marriage Act and all the stuff that preceded it regarding the Republican Party's battle against homosexuality. That was really a weird time in the Republican Party, and all of the wars that the Republican Party continued and continues to support. So I became a registered Libertarian around the time I became a police officer in around 2011. Worked as a cop, as a registered Libertarian the whole time. That's why I spend so much time talking about ending the war on drugs. I think most cops will tell you, wherever you are ethically, as Libertarians, of course, we believe that it's not an ethical proposition for the government to tell you what you can do or what you cannot do with your body. But most cops will tell you, irrespective of your ethics, the war on drugs just doesn't work as a practical matter. Objectively speaking, the war on drugs kills people by creating black markets. It doesn't help people avoid drugs. It doesn't help people get out from under addiction issues or other related mental health issues. It creates crime. Anyone who's worried about crime and doesn't want to retire the war on drugs, I don't think that, we can have a very serious conversation with you. These things are just inextricably linked, and you see these things as a police officer. I have often said to my fellow cops, if you weren't a professional economist before becoming a cop will turn you into an economist, because you see the effects of bad public policy, especially at the local level, up close and personal. Things like crappy schools, crappy housing policy, zoning policy, welfare policy, of course, and the world's most oppressive criminal justice system. So all of these, went into the development of my own personal feelings about libertarianism. First, fiscal conservatism, the idea that the world works better if you allow the economy to make decisions for ourselves and not have the government weigh in on us. I was a professional advocate for free markets for a decade after working for the for the White House. So I have a long history of working at keeping our policies as free market as possible. But it was really the time I became a cop that I also came to libertarianism from the other side, which is to say the ethical side, that we have the right to make decisions for ourselves. And I personally believe, as a matter of faith, we as individuals all have an obligation to our own personal agency and personal responsibility.
Okay. Similar question to you, Rec. Tell us about your ideological journey to becoming a Libertarian presidential candidate.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could go back pretty far. I've written about this extensively. There are several essays on my website about this. One is called From Leftism to Liberty, A Personal Journey. It's published in an anthology of libertarian autobiographies. I've written about it on the Mises Institute Wire, how I went from leftism to libertarianism. And I could add a chapter to all this stuff. And I've written about it in Beyond Woke, Springtime for Snowflakes, Google Archipelago, 3 books written from a libertarian perspective. I have 2 others as well since I became a libertarian. So I've written 5 books from a libertarian perspective, fighting the good fight on all these issues and more. And it was, there's no secret about how things went for me at NYU and how they clamped down on me and how I became a civil libertarian overnight when they tried to silence me. And then how I immediately dove into the literature deeply, starting with Mises, continuing and several of his books, including Human Action, but also some others like Socialism, a Sociological and Economic Analysis. And also I've, got into Rothbard, of course, and the keys there are, Toward a New Liberty, and of course, the Anatomy of the State. These are profoundly influential books on my career. I didn't become a libertarian by Googling it. Let me just say that. I became a libertarian by studying it and by immersing myself deeply in it, theoretically, politically, economically, and otherwise. And I would challenge anybody to test their bona fides in libertarian thought and libertarian ideas with anybody at all. I think that having written for the Mises Institute for 7 years, spoken at 5 of their events, spoken at 5 Mises Caucus events, written hundreds of essays about this, talking about not only how I got to where I am, but what I am now. There's a plethora of material out there. And I think that I will leave it at that because I can't recount the whole history. There's a lot of, there's a lot of details that I won't go into, but I've already gone into them at great depth and length.
Okay. So we're going to go back to our 2 minutes and 1 minute format. These questions are going to be on economic policy and taxation. We will just continue flip-flopping back and forth. Back to Mike, starting. So start thinking of your answers here. Libertarians typically advocate for a reduction in government size and spending. Can you outline a plan to significantly reduce federal spending? Which areas would you prioritize for cuts, and how would you address the potential social and economic impacts of these reductions, particularly in terms of budget deficits and national debt?
Sure. It might seem like there's a lot to unpack there, but the truth of the matter is that all evil committed by the government comes from the fact that we let it spend too much money. We have an expression in the Libertarian Party that taxation is theft, and it is, right? But we need to recognize that all government spending is theft, whether it's financed through taxation, whether it's financed through borrowing, whether it's financed through inflation and allowing the Fed to issue too much money. All government spending is theft. We need to cut back all government spending. You had asked about specific programs. The vast majority of our financial problem at the federal government level is due to welfare programs. It's because of entitlement programs. I think as a strategic matter, the way to go after these programs is to enact an overall cap on federal spending. We had a cap on federal spending when I worked for the White House all those years ago. It didn't work perfectly. There are things that you can do to make it work better, but fundamentally, that is the right idea. And the reason for that is that as a political matter, it's very difficult to get Congress to agree to cut back on a particular program, right? No congressman, no senator wants to hold up his or her hand and say, oh yeah, I'm going to vote down your favorite welfare program. But it's much more politically viable to enact an overall umbrella cap and then to bring that down so that all programs get a haircut across the border. Because what we want to do is dramatically reduce government spending, not just a little bit and not just in one program. So politically, the right strategy is an overall cap that you bring down. That would pick up a lot of the reductions that we want in defense, for example, as well.
Is it my turn? You want me to answer the same question?
Okay. It's your turn, Rick.
Yes. I mean, I have to point to, look, much as I like Mike and I think he's great and so forth, there is a distinguishing factor here between our campaigns and our policies and our beliefs. I think I'm not running to reform the state. I'm running to dismantle it. So I call for the end of the whole military industrial complex, the CIA, the NSA, and all the other intelligence agencies, the entire regulatory regime. I would get rid of all of these apparatuses of the state and their repressive state apparatuses. They are there to repress the population and to control us in one way or another. I would get rid of them all. I think it's a fundamental truth that the state is endemically evil. It is a parasite. It is nothing but a parasite. It has to go. And we can't have a shorter term goal than that. We can have shorter term measures to get there, but we must have that as a lodestar that we're going after, because that's the only way we'll know that we're going in the right direction. Is that a total abolition, beginning with all of these agencies? Yes, of course, the welfare state, but the warfare state, first and foremost, must go. It is not only the source of robbery and extortion from the American public taxpayer, it is also a death machine that is killing people all over the world. And in the Middle East and in Russia and Ukraine, and they're gearing up for a conflict with Taiwan. That military-industrial complex, the whole schemata has to go, and that means no funding of it. I was looking at some recent footage, or not recent footage, recently looking at some footage of John F. Kennedy, and he had some bold statements, man. He said the whole warfare apparatus system must be dismantled, and that's absolutely true.
Any rebuttal, Mike?
Sure. What Michael said is true, but I think he answered the wrong question. Our defense problem is not mostly one of money, and our money problem is not mostly about defense. The question was, what are you going to do about our government spending too much money? And the answer is not reduce the Defense Department budget or reduce the CIA. Yes, we want to get rid of the CIA completely, but not because of money. There's hardly any money in the grand scheme of things tied up with the CIA at all. and we do want to bring the troops home and close bases. But the big problem with our foreign policy is not merely that it spends too much money, which it absolutely does. The big problem is that it kills too many people. The foreign policy that we have in the United States needs to change by getting us out of NATO, unwinding our stupid commitment to Taiwan, getting out of the idea of passing foreign aid around the world because it gets us into these stupid situations like Israel that you and I both hate, and any number of other situations as well, including Ukraine. The problem with us fighting a proxy war with Russia is in part money, but not mostly money. The problem is that we kill people and that we engage in proxy war with people all over the world. But the answer to Brittany's question, which was how are you going to reduce the amount of money that the government spends? The answer to that has to be entitlement programs. And the way to go at that is an overall cap on federal spending that you bring down as rapidly as possible. Yes, but that's how to do it.
Any rebuttal?
Yeah, I just want to say, look, I pointed to the major costs to our federal government, and certainly the military is a massive one. Of course, the social welfare programs are a massive one. And in terms of the war machine, I think I made it clear. It's not merely a monetary matter. It's not merely a matter of money. It's a matter of ethics, and we are paying to have people killed. This is just outrageous. I would cut all funding immediately to Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, all of it, all foreign funds, all aid, all military weapons, all of that should be discontinued pronto without any question whatsoever.
Okay. On to our next one. We're going to start with Rec for this. Many libertarians argue that excessive regulation stifles entrepreneurial initiative and economic growth. Could you discuss specific examples of current regulations that you believe are the most detrimental to the economy? What measures would you propose to ensure a balance between necessary regulation and maintaining a free market that promotes innovation and competition?
Well, I mean, the examples of the government's regulation curbing entrepreneurship and innovation are legion. I mean, I could point to some recent examples, but it really is quite it's a moot point because this is the rule, not the exception. The state inhibits innovation and it inhibits entrepreneurship by virtue of controlling markets entirely. For example, I will point to the climate change tyranny that is being imposed, that is limiting what people can produce, what they can consume, what companies can, what kind of energy they use. And the Biden administration has even suggested that by 2035, they'll eliminate the use of gasoline cars. And they have other ideas in mind to control us and to limit development, to limit entrepreneurship. They're forcing this regime of climate change down our throats, and it's going to come at great cost to the American people, but also to the world at large. It is outrageous what they're doing. They're trying to control the energy market entirely. They're trying to divert everything away from so-called fossil fuels, and they are trying to impose unbelievable limitations and restrictions on us, on our liberty, on what we buy, on what we sell, on what we eat, etc. It's just unbelievable what they're trying to do, and it has to be stopped.
Okay. Mike.
Yeah, good stuff, all true. And I think that there are some ironies that we need to point out about some of the stupid stuff that the Biden administration is doing lately. We heard about the announcement, want to say just yesterday, that the Biden administration wants to impose 100% tariff on electric vehicles coming from China into the United States. Wow. Talk about getting it wrong. not only does it punish consumers and protect a market that should not be protected, thereby allowing it to not be as innovative as it needs to be, but as we all know, much of the reason why it's difficult for us to operate electric vehicles is because the infrastructure isn't there yet to support it. For example, lots of places to plug in, right? But we're not going to have as many electric vehicles as we would because of this stupid tariff. So we're actually undermining the incentive for people to create the infrastructure to go with it. You asked for examples of regulation. I would just point out, Michael's right, the energy markets are all messed up. But one of my favorite hobby horses is that the federal government makes it so damn difficult to get a permit to initiate a nuclear reactor, whereas we know that nuclear is the future of energy in the United States. We need to get the government out of it. And I think one innovative solution that libertarians can impose is to make such regulations subject to the approval of state governors. This would allow states to chart their own political futures and create a situation in which they could issue themselves, pursuant to whatever rules they want, a permit for a nuclear reactor to be initiated. This is the kind of thing that would jumpstart the innovation we need in energy markets.
Okay,
And some dude is right. No one's buying these Chinese cars yet, but they could. And by putting this tariff on it, it condemns them to extend that failure.
Yeah, they want to make the use of automobiles basically obsolete for the vast majority of the population. There's no question about it. They're saying that you can't have a gas-powered car, and yet they want to put tariffs on electric-powered cars. I mean, this is saddling the public with enormous cost and making it really out of the reach of average people, to average earning people. They will not be able to drive anything because of the EV being pushed on our throats, the cost of EVs, and the maintenance in case of a battery failure, et cetera. It's out of this world, and so it's not only hurting innovation and entrepreneurship, it's hurting the consumer very, very much, and it will continue to do so. The only way to resist it is at the local level by nullifying unlawful state laws and mandates. They have no business passing laws on these matters whatsoever.
Okay. Anything to add, Mike?
No, that's right. We need the government to stop regulating these markets so that they can take off in the way that they should. Another example is the idea of the Federal Reserve wanting to issue its own currency. That would explode the appropriate development of blockchain technology that we know needs to develop in certain ways, but that are hard to predict right now. We are soon going to reach an inflection point in the development of the smart economy, and we're going to need a smart currency, probably multiple smart currencies to go along with that. And we need the Fed to stand down and not get involved with that. That's just one more example of a place where the Fed would regulate to advantage its own currency if we allow it to issue its own currency. It's one of the reasons why we need it to stop.
Okay. We are going to move on to Second Amendment. The Second Amendment asserts the right to bear arms as fundamental to maintaining a free state. From your libertarian standpoint, do you support any restrictions on gun ownership? And if so, what specific restrictions do you believe are consistent with both public safety and individual liberty?
I'll go first on that if I can. First of all, I think that the right to own guns or any kind of weaponry or anything else for that matter is perfectly unabridgeable by the government. There's a basic premise of property ownership here. That's the fundamental premise of all ownership, including gun ownership. So we must go back to that fundamental principle that you have the right to own anything you want and can own but unless you steal it. That's a fact. So, and then I would put no restrictions on guns whatsoever. And that's from a Second Amendment standpoint, but also from a fundamental libertarian standpoint. And that is, you can own whatever you want, and self-defense is a perfect right, and it can't be abridged. And any abridgment of it has to be resisted, and it has to be resisted at the local level, because that's where we're going to fight the fight in the end.
Okay. Mike, your turn.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There is no restriction on gun ownership that makes sense. And by the way, everything Michael said is exactly right. From an ethical point of view, it's a matter of natural rights for the government not to get involved in what it is that we own and what it is that we don't own. Remember that our rights are not created by the Second Amendment, right, or the Constitution. It's just the Constitution that's supposed to be standing up for our rights. It also needs to be said that there really is no productive debate any longer about, gun restrictions. They just don't work as an objective matter. And I would say the same thing about red flag laws. And this silly idea that if you were to restrict the ownership of long guns, that you're going to reduce violence. It's just simply not true. And so whether you look at this from an ethical point of view, or you look at this objectively from the standpoint of what works and what doesn't, all of our thinking goes in the same direction. There is really no reasonable debate any longer here. The reason that there continues to be this political fight is merely because there are politicians in the United States, and by the way, around the world, that manipulate their constituents into believing things that aren't true, into believing things like if we were to restrict gun ownership, all of a sudden you would be safer. Believing things like gun-free zones make people safer, whereas we know that it's one of the most dangerous things that you can do is to create a gun-free zone. I point to schools as an example. If I were running a private school these days, I would take a shot at figuring out whether families liked the idea of all the teachers carrying and felt that that were a safer approach. And I'm guessing that the market would bear me out, that a lot of families would choose that.
Okay. Any rebuttal, Breck?
No, I don't really have a rebuttal. I just think that, look, it's too fundamental of a right to even debate. And Mike said that. Look, it goes down to property ownership first and foremost, and then self-defense secondarily. It is not up to anybody to regulate who can own something, period. Now, public safety, I think, as Mike pointed out, there's no relationship between gun ownership and public safety per se. And the kind of restrictions they want to impose, which are being pushed all over the place on state levels. We see Gavin Newsom constantly touting his plan to abolish the ownership of certain weaponry. It's just unbelievable. So there's really nothing to be said. I don't believe that we get liberty through the fear of tyranny. And so I don't think we get liberty from wanting safety, frankly. And I think safetyism is a massive detriment to the very notion of liberty. We cannot succumb to safetyism at any level.
That's really well said. The idea of safetyism, I like that a lot, because it really plays into the hands of politicians who leverage our fear against us. I don't have anything to rebut about anything Michael said. There was a comment over here that I should react to. There was a question about black markets, and I want to point out, I think that there was a miscommunication. We're on the same page here regarding black markets. We don't want government to intervene to say that we can't do something, because then people are going to do it anyway. And then it gets really dangerous when you got cops or other enforcement officers of the federal government or state government running around trying to keep you from doing something, right? that
Well,
people
they
are
do
gonna
it themselves.
Well,
Yeah.
they do it themselves. Good point. And people are going to do it anyway. That's what gets really dangerous. That's what we mean about the danger of black markets. It's the problems created when the government gets involved. That's what we mean.
Okay.
Yeah. So we should remove. I'm just reacting to the comment here. We need to remove the restrictions so that we have white markets, right? So we don't have black markets, so that people can do what it is that they want to do without fear of the state getting in your face.
Well, I do think the commenter is making a point here, and I think we should get this point out, that under the current conditions, under the state's regulations and restrictions and controls, and it's deeming things illegal, we will have black markets, and black markets under such conditions is really the free market. And that's really what you do, is you drive the free market underground. And so what the commenter is remarking upon is the idea that that we should somehow be opposed to black markets, when in fact black markets, if this regime has its way, black markets, we're going to get a lot of what we want, unfortunately, because they're making more and more things illegal. Of course, we want to have things legal or not have laws against them. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And that means allowing legitimate producers, for example, in the case of drugs, to market their products, to put labeling and information on those products, to let the informed consumer decide what they buy, and so forth. And that's what happens with drugs. That's what happens with guns. That's what happens with everything. Get rid of the government control over these, over this production and distribution and consumption of these goods, and you get rid of black markets. And that's only good because black markets are places that the government goes after, causing warfare, in effect, like the war on drugs. It becomes warfare because the government has deemed them illegal, and therefore it can go after them with force and cause conflict, making them arm themselves, and then they have gang warfare between each other, of course, to control these markets and segments and so forth. So all of that has to be eliminated, and it would be better that black markets don't exist, because everything would be allowed, and that's what we need to have.
Yeah, that's really well said. We know, and I'm glad that you brought up drugs as an example. The reason, in my view, and my observation as having worked as a police officer, much of what is killing people through the use of fentanyl and other drugs is that these markets don't operate the way that you would want normal markets, to work. People don't know how much they're taking. There are no trusted providers. The only providers are the people who are willing to risk going up against the government, right? And so you don't have effective labeling. You don't have effective revelation of what the drug is that you're taking. And you don't have retribution when you're wronged. There's a lot of fraud in these markets. It's the same problem wherever the government creates black markets. They become exceedingly, exceedingly dangerous.
And as one of the commenters pointed out, also it makes things inaccessible to us that we want. People might want or need some of these goods. I think in the case of marijuana, of course, some people literally need it for pain management and other things, for psychological well-being, for what have you. It's up to them how they use it and how much and under what conditions and circumstances. I mean, I'm not going to take a hit of mescaline before the next debate. I'm going to try to be cogent, but I'd like to use it otherwise. It helps me get different perspectives on what I'm doing. I'll be honest with you.
There you go.
Okay, I have a couple more questions here. You guys are just killing my list of questions here. You're touching everything in your answers. In light of ongoing concerns about government surveillance, what specific changes would you propose to current privacy laws to protect citizens from unwarranted intrusion by state and federal agencies. How do you balance national security interests with individual privacy rights? We'll go with Mike.
Yeah, that's a bullshit question right there. The state does not have interests. Humans have interests, okay? People, citizens have interests. The state is an extension of us. The reason the government exists, and the only legitimate reason for allowing a government to exist, is to protect us from something external and to stand up for our individual liberties. And short of that, there's no trade-off to be had. You talked about specific changes. I would not allow local governments and state governments to be surveilling us the way that so many governments are starting to do. This whole idea of facial recognition, for example, I think is really problematic. Once you allow a government to use facial recognition, you're pretty much into the idea that they're going to be collecting data on your location, your transactions, yes, what you look like and who you hang out with and everything else. This is a real problem, and not just metadata, but actual data. And I realize that a lot of localities don't allow the storage of this information, but that's only a matter of for how long you allow these agencies to store information. It's simply not true that they don't store it for some period of time. And so we've already crossed the Rubicon in terms of, do we have agencies using high-tech surveillance and storing transactional information about us? We're already there. So what I would do is, first of all, at the state level, you need state law that says you're not going to put up with it from local agencies or from state agencies. At the federal level, you need to get the federal government out of it. A libertarian-minded administration can get the government out of this completely. I know that we just signed new regulation updating, allowing the FISA courts to continue. We need to stop that. And the one thing I would offer as a new change or wrinkle is that I would have the Justice Department of the federal government actually trying to play a positive role that I believe it was intended to play by standing up for our individual liberties at the local level and bringing civil action against states and municipalities that violate our privacy.
Okay, Rec.
Yes. So, I don't think that I would impose any new laws. All you have to do is get rid of the NSA, and the other agencies that are spying on us and that are collecting data on us. Get rid of them, and then the problem goes away. You don't have to introduce new laws. Just get rid of the agencies. They're the ones that are causing the problem. If we add more laws, we're just adding layers of bureaucracy, and then they continue to skirt them in ways that they find available by virtue of parsing the text in a certain way, and then Congress signs into law allowing FISA and other types of intrusions. So, they've got to be destroyed. And then in terms of other things in terms of privacy that we need to be on the lookout for is the digital identity, which is going to be a record of everything that you've done from the cradle to the grave, including vaccine status and even a possible political profile. This is all real, and this will be tied to the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, and can be used as a way to keep you from purchasing certain things or selling certain things or selling anything for that matter if they deem you a reprobate of some sort. All this is ridiculous. I don't want to introduce new laws to protect our privacy. I want to get rid of the privacy invaders in the first place. Get rid of the surveillance state altogether. Get them out.
Hey, any rebuttal, Mike?
That's all right. What I was saying was you need legislation at the state level to keep communities from doing it, because otherwise you get these local police departments and in some cases even sheriff's offices thinking that they can retain data using facial recognition and using license plate readers. and all of that has to be stopped. No, you're right. At the federal level, we don't need new legislation. A libertarian-minded administration could shut this down, even without going. Yes, we all want to get rid of the CIA and the NSA, absolutely, but you can stop these things without going through the processes necessary to shut down these agencies. You can stop these agencies from collecting this data, and that has to be done. And you're right, regarding the central bank digital currency, we need to stop the Fed from issuing its own currency. As you know, I'm a big believer that we need to end the Federal Reserve System lock, stock, and barrel for other reasons too, because we need to stop this crappy style of monetary policy. But the big thing about the Fed's new currency, if we allow it to issue it, is that it would completely undermine the development of new currencies that we really want to have compete in the future.
Okay. And then last little bit, my Rec, if you need anything, add anything. Are you good?
I just want to add that even in lieu of getting rid of the Fed, or I should say in advance of it, not in lieu, but in advance of getting rid of the Federal Reserve, we can use parallel alternative currencies now. So what we need to do is get rid of the legal tender laws. And so I'm all about cutting laws, because cutting laws is how you get rid of the state. The more laws you cut, the less state power you have. So we should be trying to cut laws, even at the local level. And that and the way to keep these incursions from the federal level coming down to the local level is by nullification, nullifying state policies, laws, mandates, etc., and making them ineffective at the local level. We don't need lawfare. We need law abrogation. We need to cut laws as much as possible. Every time you cut a law, you cut state power.
Okay. So that wraps up all the questions I have. It was brought to my attention that one of my questions for you, Rec, was misquoted because it was a submission. So I'm going to go back to it and ask it how it was intended to be asked. And it's from Robbie.
He's quoting it. I don't think he's actually asking it. Somebody else.
We had asked him to provide us the proper verbiage.
I don't think that's Robbie's intentionality there, but
no, because he's been discussing with our moderator. When I'd asked about your support for Trump, everything, so it seems as back in 2020 you were more in support of Trump. How has your views on Operation Warp Speed and Trump's policy changed over the last 4 years?
Okay, first of all, this isn't. I never described myself as a former Marxist for Trump. What it was is that I got into a podcast where a guy called himself a Marxist for Trump. And so they wanted to call me a former Marxist for Trump. But I was not a former Marxist for Trump. That was their nomenclature, not mine. So that should answer that. I never supported Operation Warp Speed. I was against it from the start. In fact, I saw the whole thing coming. I knew about Clade X, Event 201, and Crimson Contagion, these simulations that were run previous to COVID in 2018, 19, and all the way up until the early stages of the COVID crisis itself with Event 201, in which the state, in the case of Crimson Contagion, the World Economic Forum, Johns Hopkins University, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation ran a simulation in which they basically laid out the whole COVID scenario in advance, including the response by governments. I wrote about that before this was even known. And so I never was for Operation Warp Speed. I was against Operation Warp Speed from the start. In fact, I saw the whole thing coming before it even unrolled itself. I was saying that this was going to happen before COVID actually took place. thanks to knowing about these simulations, which basically forecast what the state and its accomplices have in mind.
Okay, I have another submitted question. Do you like what the LNC has done to get attention? And what else can you do to advance messaging? And this applies for both of you.
You want me to go?
We'll start with
All right, thanks. I think that there
you
are
can go,
definitely trade. All right, thanks a lot. Look, there are obviously trade-offs here, right? The idea that our leadership had was, you know, if Trump shows up, we'll get more publicity. I'm sure that'll turn out to be true. If RFK comes, maybe we'll get some publicity. If Vivek Ramaswamy comes, I don't know what we get. That's just weird. I can't defend that one. There is obviously a downside, right? I do not adhere to the school that says all PR is good PR. I do believe there is such a thing as bad PR. And what I mean by that is when it's misleading, right? If there are people out there who look at this situation and say, oh boy, I guess that's what a libertarian is, right? Someone who likes Trump, that's a problem for us because our party isn't very well branded now. And vice versa. You know, if Trump is out there saying, well, I'm a libertarian and libertarians love me, that's a problem for us. And so there is definitely a trade-off. Look, as far as messaging goes, I think that it's up to us, right? As candidates for president, we've got to run unapologetically principled, bold messaging platforms. We need to be out there on the leading edge. We need to completely differentiate hard against Republicans and against Democrats. That's our job, right? We need to leave no room for misinterpretation, that there is no overlap between us and a Republican or between us and a Democrat. If one of us says something that you might hear from a Republican or Democrat, we have misspoken. There is no reason for us to say stuff that you're going to hear from one of those people. And in my view, inviting Trump to the convention makes that slightly harder. But it doesn't make it any more or less important. That remains our job. My campaign is set up to do exactly that. And we take that obligation very seriously. And I would point out, by the way, yes, there was a comment there. Isn't 2024 a big opportunity for us? Absolutely. And it's more than that. It's an obligation, right? This is our call of duty. This is our chance to get it right. And waiting for a Republican, waiting for a Democrat to lead our nation back toward a constitution of the limited powers is waiting for something that's just not going to happen. It's up to us as libertarians, and that does not mean finding common ground with the likes of Donald Trump.
Okay, Rec, do you have anything to say?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, yes, I have some things to say. First of all, this was a stroke of brilliance, I think, on the part of the chair of the Libertarian Party, Angela McArdle. I think it represents a challenge and an opportunity, but it is a challenge. We need to frame this properly. We need to be able to get this forum to get our ideas across and to these people directly and their followers. This represents an opportunity to actually expose people to principled libertarian philosophy and politics, first and foremost, right in the context of our own convention. Finally, after all, the Libertarian Party for over 50 to 70 years has been attempting to get on the national stage with other political parties, their leadership in the debates and elsewhere for all this time, and hasn't succeeded. So this was a new strategy. It was to bring them to us, and that's a novel approach. Now, I think I would use Dave Smith's analogy or metaphor here regarding this, where he said it's kind of like a long bomb. We're taking a risk. There's no question, but there is no removal of risk from life, and we're taking a risk by throwing a long pass It could be a touchdown. Maybe it gets intercepted, but we tried. That's the thing. We tried, and we're bringing these people in, and I think we have a chance to not only influence their followers, maybe, possibly, even somehow influence them as recalcitrant and as they are in their own idiocy.
And I know, Michael, you'll like this idea. I do believe that we need to be given a chance to speak to the RNC.
What we need is to have our candidate challenge Trump directly on stage. And I don't think it should be anybody but the candidate, not some winner of some straw poll, not anything else. It has to be the candidate or else somebody else entirely. And yeah, I mean, we could have negotiated something such that we got on the RNC stage as well. And that's maybe a possibility. I wouldn't say that's to rule that out. I don't know what deal that Angela made with the Trump campaign, or whether that could even be held. Whether they could even deliver on such a promise, because they're not the RNC, but they certainly have influence over it. But I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility. We would love to get on the stage with our candidate on the RNC's convention. Yes, move up the candidate vote to Saturday so that it's our nominee who is addressing Trump directly. Otherwise, go with a third party who's not one of the candidates, because otherwise it tilts the election. I would say that even if I won the straw poll, I don't want the straw poll to determine who gets to address Trump.
That makes a lot of sense. The only downside to that, and I'm not suggesting that this one particular idea should carry the day, but one downside to that is I don't like the look of us rearranging, a lot about our convention to accommodate Donald Trump. I'm afraid that the press would notice that and suggest that, we're kowtowing and that sort of thing. So I worry about that.
Well, somebody's going to address Trump, and it should be either the nominee or somebody other than the nominees, any of the nominees altogether, any of the other candidates, that is, people that have been nominated to be a candidate. We should have either the winner of the nomination process, or we should have somebody else entirely address them. I don't think it's necessarily flipping over head over heels in order to accommodate Trump. It's to accommodate our purpose, which is to have our representative address Trump directly and to challenge him on his draconian policies, his trade barriers, his trade wars, his Operation Warp Speed, his bellicosity, the whole 9 yards, everything that that we have objections to, which is a great deal. That should be left to the candidate. Barring that, it should be some third party. That's all that's all I was saying there.
Okay. So that pretty much is going to wrap up our debate. The only thing we have left is about a 2-minute closing statement from each candidate. I will go with Mike ter Maat for his closing statement first, and then we will go on to Rec.
Well, thanks, Brittany. I appreciate that very much. This was great. And Michael, thanks for taking the time to do this. We're very excited about the convention, obviously. I'm particularly excited about our campaign. Our campaign is set up to execute on what I think is a huge opportunity for our party and a huge obligation to our movement to get this right. I believe that we need to run on a platform that is unapologetically principled. That includes medical freedom. That is a huge part of it. Not necessarily because we know there's another virus around the corner, but there could well be. But because the lessons that we should be learning from the COVID-19 nightmare of how our government handled things and shoved so many things down our throats, in many cases literally, these lessons are what we need to learn so that we can keep our government from leveraging fear and leveraging force against us in the future. Yes, that may be in the context of climate change or alleged climate change. It may be in the context of a financial disaster, a natural disaster, World War III. There are any number of disasters that our government can and will leverage against us. And we need to learn the methods that our government uses to execute on that. So looking forward to seeing everybody in Washington. I hope that we can gain your support for our campaign. It is set up for victory. We are playing to win. It is the reason not only we have such an unapologetically principled platform, it is also the reason why we're running with so much professionalism and credibility. As you all know, we have payrolled already 20 different individuals. We are ready to go to make that turn to the general election. And we lean very hard into my own personal background in public service and in public policy, both in Washington and as a police officer. I believe that my campaign is uniquely set up to clear the threshold of credibility that voters will expect for us to actually compete in the presidential cycle to disrupt the duopoly. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Rec, your closing statements.
Yes, I mean, I'm not going to deliver my debate closing statement here tonight. I want to talk in the context of the Medical Freedom Caucus and the medical freedom issue, strictly for the most part. And I think that what we need is leadership of this party by someone who could see the propaganda and the lies for what they were in real time. That is not so that we're not faced having had a nomination process and we're left with somebody that may fall for the next scam that comes down the pike. We need to be avant-garde, out on the cutting edge, and seeing things before they become policy. We need to be able to have the power of narrative, countering the narratives that the state uses to enact its policies. We need to be fighters in the cultural realm. And that means having the right messenger and the right message. And I think I have the right message. And I think I am the right messenger. I have the best message because I have the longest documented track record in telling the truth and the greatest name recognition outside the party and the most access to large audiences that are open to our message. I'm positioned to conduct a 50-state and even an international messaging campaign, and I have the best message. It's the message of pure libertarianism on which the party was founded. And in my campaign, in the case of my campaign, it's paired with the best strategy, which is decentralization and nullification and localism. So that's what I'm running on. And I think that this is the only campaign that has an after effect, that has a follow-up that continues despite the end of the campaign season. It is not strictly an electoral battle. This is a movement that I'm leading here, a movement of decentralization and nullification, a movement against the state to dismantle the central government. It can only be achieved by the people themselves in a decentralized revolution. I'm running to be the beacon of that revolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I want to thank both of our candidates for coming and spending time with me tonight. And I appreciate all of your guys' insight on everything that we discussed. I also want to thank our audience that we had. The comments and questions that we got were great. The discussion that went on in the chats was very interesting and very polite. I want to thank everyone and show that I really appreciated everyone acting appropriately and mature with it. And this was great, just having this vital discussion about the future of libertarianism and just our society in general. Remember that, I'm going to put out that informed voting is the keystone of our democracy, and having discussions like this helps inform our voters come for both the Libertarians come next weekend or this coming weekend, Memorial Day weekend, and also into November. I want to put out there and also thank our co-founders of the Medical Freedom Caucus, both my husband, Theodore Kosin, and Dr. Irene Mavrakakis. Both of them helped a lot in the behind the scenes, helping me get this all set up and squared away. Want to put this out there that this was my first podcast that I was moderating. So everything seemed to go well, and I appreciate you guys for being on with me with this.
Thank you to you,
Again,
Brittany, for
everything
doing this.
seemed to go great, and I appreciate you guys. So thank you,
Good job,
and
Mike.
I want to wish everyone a good night.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you. Thank you, Michael. Good work. I look forward to seeing you.
Always true in your case, Mike. See you then.